The velvet curtains parted just enough for Faith Larson to glimpse the empty tables stretching across her jazz bar like a sea of polished wood and unused chairs. And her stomach twisted, because someone had paid $20,000 to sit alone in all that silence. She adjusted the microphone stand with trembling fingers, her silver dress catching the spotlight that always made her feel both exposed and invincible. The Crimson Note had been her sanctuary for 3 years now, ever since she'd stopped trying to make it as a singer in New York and settled into this cozy Portland venue where the owner actually appreciated her voice. Thursday nights usually brought a respectable crowd, couples nursing wine while she poured her heart into standards from the 40s and 50s. But tonight, according to Marcus the bartender, some wealthy businessman had called that afternoon and bought out every seat in the house. "You still performing?" Marcus had asked her an hour ago, his dark eyebrows raised in confusion. Guy said he wanted the full experience just for himself. Faith had laughed it off, though the request unsettled her. She'd dealt with strange audience members before. The drunk ones who shouted requests, the crying ones going through divorces, the silent ones who stared too intensely. But an entire buyout, that suggested either profound loneliness or something more sinister, and she couldn't decide which possibility worried her more. She smoothed her hands down her dress and stepped through the curtain onto the small stage. The house lights were dimmed just like always, but instead of scanning dozens of faces, her eyes found him immediately. He sat 3 tables back center stage, exactly where the acoustics were best. A tumbler of what looked like whiskey sat untouched before him, catching the amber glow from the table's candle. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, the collar of his white shirt open just enough to seem casual despite the obvious expense of the fabric. Dark hair, maybe early 30s, with the kind of strong jawline that belonged in cologne advertisements. His hands rested on the table, and even from the stage, Faith could see he wasn't relaxed. His shoulders carried tension like a physical weight. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Not attraction exactly, though she registered his handsomeness in some distant part of her brain. It was more like recognition, as if her soul knew his face even though she'd never seen him before in her life. Faith forced herself to look away, nodding to Raymond on piano. He played the opening notes of Autumn Leaves, and she let the familiar melody carry her past her nervousness. Her voice filled the empty room, bouncing off walls that had heard her sing 1,000 times. Usually she could lose herself in the music, let the lyrics and rhythm erase everything else. But tonight she felt hyper-aware of her single audience member, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He didn't move except to breathe, didn't touch his drink. Just watched her with an intensity that should have felt invasive but somehow didn't. She finished the first song to absolute silence. No applause, which made sense. Clapping for yourself seemed absurd. But he nodded once, a small gesture that felt like the highest praise she'd ever received. 3 more songs. The Nearness of You. Someone to Watch Over Me. My Funny Valentine. Each one she chose without thinking, pulling from the catalog of longing and loneliness that seemed appropriate for whatever private heartbreak had brought this man to buy out her entire venue. By the 5th song, her curiosity had grown into something demanding. Who does this? Who spends that kind of money to sit alone in a jazz bar? She could have continued through her usual set, taken her break, come back for the second half, and collected her pay without ever speaking to him. That would have been professional, safe. But Faith had never been particularly good at safe. She finished bewitched, bothered and bewildered, and set the microphone back in its stand. Raymond looked at her questioningly. She wasn't supposed to break for another 20 minutes. She ignored him and walked down the 3 steps from the stage, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The man straightened slightly as she approached, something like surprise crossing his features. Up close, he was even more striking. Not pretty boy handsome, but rugged in a way that suggested he'd lived an interesting life. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes were darker than she'd thought, brown edging into black. Faith pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without asking permission. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table. "Why?" He blinked at her. "Why what? Why buy out an entire jazz bar to sit alone? If you wanted privacy, you could have bought the album. If you're having some kind of crisis, there are therapists. If you're trying to impress someone, they're not here to be impressed." She kept her tone light, curious rather than accusatory. "I'm trying to figure out which kind of story this is." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real expression she'd seen from him. "You always interrogate your audience members. Only the ones who pay enough to qualify as patrons rather than customers. I figure that buys you some personal attention." She gestured to his untouched whiskey. "You haven't had a sip. You've barely moved. So either my singing is so captivating you've entered some kind of trance, or you're here for a reason that has nothing to do with jazz." He was quiet for a moment, his long fingers drumming once against the table. Then he picked up his glass and took a slow drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "Your singing is extraordinary," he said finally. "That's not flattery. I've heard a lot of vocalists, professionals who command $5,000 a night in Vegas or New York. You're better than most of them." Heat crept up Faith's neck. But you're right. I'm here for a reason." He set his glass down carefully. "My name is Ethan Yates." The name tickled something in her memory. Yates. She'd heard it recently, maybe on the news. Should I know that name? Probably not, unless you follow commercial real estate development or read the business section. His voice carried no ego, just fact. "My company renovates historic buildings. We take places that are falling apart and restore them." Understanding hit her like cold water. The crimson note. The building it's in, yes. He leaned back in his chair and she saw weariness in his face now. "I bought it 3 weeks ago. The structure's been deteriorating for years. The owner didn't have the money for the repairs it needs, and the city was going to condemn it." Faith's mouth went dry. She'd known the building was old, had heard vague mentions of plumbing issues and foundation concerns. But Charlie, the owner, had always waved off her questions, said everything was under control. "We're being evicted," she said flatly. "I'm renovating the building, not demolishing it. The work will take 4 to 6 months. After that, the spaces will be available to lease again." Ethan's voice stayed carefully neutral. "Charlie has first right of refusal to return, but he's already told my team he's planning to retire. Apparently this was the push he needed. And you came here to tell me this yourself. That's not usually how rich developers operate, is it?" The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "No." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, messing up the careful styling. "I came because I've been doing this work for 8 years, and I've never felt guilty about it before. These buildings would crumble without intervention. I'm preserving history, creating safe spaces for businesses and residents. It's good work. But 3 days ago, my assistant compiled information about the current tenants in this building. There's a bookstore on the first floor that's been operating for 40 years. A law office on the second floor that does pro bono work for immigrants. And this jazz bar where a singer named Faith Larson performs 6 nights a week to crowds of people who look at her like she's giving them something they can't get anywhere else." He met her eyes and she saw genuine conflict there. "I looked you up, found some recordings online from when you were in New York. You're talented enough that you should be famous." "I don't want famous," Faith said quietly. "I want to sing. There's a difference." "I know." His voice dropped, becoming more intimate in the empty room. I drove by here last Thursday, stood outside and listened through the door because I couldn't hear you properly from the street. Someone came out for a cigarette and held the door for me, assuming I was a customer. So I came in and sat in the back. You were singing something sad. I don't know the title, but the way you delivered it made me understand why people believe in things like souls. Faith's heart hammered against her ribs. She should have been angry at this man who was dismantling her life, but instead she felt something warm and terrifying spreading through her chest. I went home that night and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Ethan continued. About how my company is technically doing good work, but we're also making everything more expensive. When this building reopens, the rent will be triple what it is now. Fair market value for a renovated historic property. The bookstore will close. The law office will relocate somewhere smaller. And this jazz bar will become a boutique or a gallery or some other thing that serves people with money instead of people with souls. So you bought out the bar because you feel guilty. Faith heard the harshness in her own voice and didn't try to soften it. That's what this is. Absolution through grand gestures. Maybe. Ethan's jaw tightened. Or maybe I wanted one more night where this place got to be what it's supposed to be, where you got to sing for someone who understands what they're hearing. But you're still tearing it apart. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm stabilizing a building that would otherwise collapse. The cultural loss isn't my fault. It's the fault of economic systems neither of us created. He sounded defensive now, and Faith was glad. Better than that calm resignation. That's a convenient way to avoid responsibility, she said. And staying angry at me is a convenient way to avoid dealing with the situation. Ethan leaned forward, his voice turning urgent. I looked into your background, Faith. You moved to New York at 19, spent 6 years trying to break into the music industry. From what I could find, you were good enough. You got callbacks, made connections, but something happened and you left. Faith stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You have no right to dig into my life. You're right, I don't. He stood too, and she realized he was tall, well over 6 feet. But I can't stop thinking about you, and I don't know what to do with that. The confession hung in the air between them. Faith's pulse raced. She should leave. Walk back to the stage, finish her set for this stranger who'd invaded her space and her privacy. Instead, she heard herself asking, "What do you want from me?" "I don't know." Ethan's voice went rough. I told myself I came here to apologize in person, to see you one more time before the renovation started. But standing here now, that feels like a lie. The truth is I've been thinking about you for a week straight. I've listened to every recording of yours I could find online. I've driven past this building 3 times even though I have no business reason to. And tonight, when my assistant asked if I really wanted to spend $20,000 for a private concert, I said yes, without hesitation. Faith's breath caught. She'd had admirers before, fans who waited after shows to tell her how much her music meant to them. But this felt different, more raw. You don't even know me. I know you sing like you're trying to heal something broken in the world. I know you chose to stay in Portland when you could have kept fighting for fame. I know you came out here to ask me why instead of just taking the money and ignoring me. He took a step closer, and Faith could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. Tell me I'm crazy. Tell me to leave and never come back. She should say exactly that. This man represented everything going wrong in her life. He was the embodiment of wealth pushing out art, progress destroying community. But when she looked into his dark eyes, she didn't see an enemy. She saw someone as lost as she was, reaching for connection in the only way he knew how. You're not crazy, Faith said softly, but this is. I know. They stood there in the candlelight, the empty bar stretching around them like a held breath. Finally, Faith said, "I need to finish my set." "You paid for the full experience. Let me take you to dinner after, please." Ethan's voice carried a vulnerability that didn't match his expensive suit. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm asking anyway." Faith knew she should say no. Should maintain professional distance, protect herself from whatever this was. But she'd spent 3 years playing it safe in Portland, building a small life that fit comfortably around her past disappointments. Maybe it was time to be reckless again. "There's a diner 3 blocks from here," she said. "Rosie's. They make decent pie." The smile that transformed Ethan's face made her stomach flip. "I'll be waiting when you're done." Faith walked back to the stage, feeling his eyes on her the entire way. Raymond gave her a questioning look, but she just counted them into the next song. "The very thought of you." She'd chosen it without conscious decision, but as the words left her mouth, she felt them differently, not as practiced lyrics but as confession. She sang 4 more songs, pouring everything into each note. When she finally took her bow to an audience of 1, Ethan's applause filled the empty room like a promise. 30 minutes later, Faith had changed into jeans and a sweater, washed off her stage makeup, and pulled her dark hair into a ponytail. She found Ethan waiting by the bar, chatting easily with Marcus about whiskey distilleries. He'd kept his suit on but looked more relaxed, his jacket draped over one arm. "Ready?" he asked when he saw her. They walked to Rosie's through Portland's misty night air, not quite touching but close enough that Faith felt the warmth radiating from his body. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of teenagers in one booth and a tired waitress refilling sugar dispensers. They slid into a booth by the window. Ethan ordered coffee and apple pie. Faith asked for the same, though her stomach was too knotted to actually eat. "So," Ethan said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug, "tell me the real story. Why did you leave New York?" Faith considered deflecting, giving him some vague answer about wanting a change. But something about the way he looked at her, patient and genuinely interested, made her want to be honest. "I had a contract offer," she said. "Small label, nothing major, but a real deal. Original songs, studio time, the whole thing. My manager was thrilled. Said it was exactly the break we'd been working toward. But the producer wanted to change everything about me. My sound, my look, my name. He said Faith Larson was too ordinary, that I needed to be edgier, more commercial. He wanted me to sing pop songs written by other people instead of the jazz standards I loved." She stared into her coffee. "I tried to compromise. Spent 3 months in the studio recording songs I hated, styling my hair ways that didn't feel like me, learning choreography for music videos. And then one day I was standing in front of a mirror wearing leather pants and a corset top, about to shoot a video for a song about partying in clubs, and I just broke." "Broke how?" Ethan's voice was gentle. "Panic attack. Full on, couldn't breathe, thought I was dying kind of panic attack. They called an ambulance. Very dramatic." Faith laughed without humor. "The label dropped me the next day, said I was too unreliable. My manager said I'd thrown away the opportunity of a lifetime over ego and stubbornness." "That's not ego," Ethan said firmly. "That's knowing who you are. Or it's being too inflexible to succeed in a competitive industry." Faith met his eyes. "I've had 3 years to think about it. Sometimes I'm proud of myself for sticking to my principles. Sometimes I think I'm just a coward who got scared when things got real." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. The touch sent electricity up her arm. "I've met a lot of people who sold pieces of themselves for success. They make money, sure. They get recognition. But there's something hollow in their eyes, like they can't quite remember who they were before they started compromising." He squeezed her hand gently. You don't have that hollowness. When you sing, you're completely present. That's not something you can fake. Faith felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. You're very confident about someone you just met. I know. It doesn't make sense. Ethan pulled his hand back, running it through his hair in what she was learning was a nervous gesture. I've dated, had relationships. Nothing serious but normal stuff. I've never felt like this before, like I'd do anything just to keep talking to you. That's attraction, Faith said, trying to sound rational even as her heart raced. It's not real connection. Then let's make it real. Tell me more. What do you love besides music? For the next 2 hours they talked. Faith learned that Ethan had grown up in Seattle, the son of an architect mother and a contractor father. He'd studied engineering but discovered his passion lay in preservation rather than new construction. His company, Yates Development, had restored over 30 historic buildings across the Pacific Northwest. He drove a 10-year-old truck, despite being able to afford any car he wanted because he'd bought it with his first real paycheck and felt sentimental about it. He had an older sister who taught high school in Tacoma, and a dog named Hemingway who'd been trained as a therapy animal before washing out of the program for being too friendly. Faith told him about growing up in a small Oregon town, the daughter of 2 teachers who'd encouraged her love of music but worried about her pursuing it professionally. About her college roommate Sophia, who'd moved to Paris and sent postcards every month. About how she'd started volunteering at a community center in Portland, teaching basic music skills to kids who couldn't afford lessons. By the time the waitress not so subtly suggested they leave so she could close up, Faith felt like she'd known Ethan for years instead of hours. They walked back toward the Crimson Note where Faith's car was parked. The streets were empty now, Portland tucked in for the night. Ethan walked close enough that their shoulders brushed occasionally. I want to see you again, he said as they reached her car. Tomorrow, if you'll let me. Faith knew she should be cautious, should let this be a strange, beautiful night and nothing more, but she didn't want to. I work tomorrow night, singing. I'll come listen. I'll sit in back this time, be a normal audience member, and after we find somewhere that serves better pie than Rosie's. His smile turned playful. Unless you have a policy against dating men who are disrupting your workplace. I should, Faith admitted. This is complicated. It doesn't have to be. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I can't undo the building sale. The renovations have to happen. But I can make sure Charlie gets a fair deal. I can work with local businesses to find temporary locations. I can even adjust the timeline if that helps. Because of me, Faith's voice came out breathy. Because it's the right thing to do, but yes, also because of you. He lifted his hand, hovering it near her face like he wanted to touch her but was waiting for permission. Tell me if I'm reading this wrong. Tell me you don't feel this too. Faith had spent 3 years being careful, being safe, building a small, manageable life where nothing hurt too much because nothing meant too much. Standing here with Ethan, she felt that careful life cracking open. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. He responded immediately, his hands coming up to frame her face with surprising gentleness. He kissed like he meant it, thorough and intense but not aggressive. Faith's hands found his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and somewhere in her mind she registered that this was crazy, kissing a man she'd just met in a parking lot at midnight. But mostly, she just felt alive. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. That was, he said, then stopped. I don't have words. Me neither. Faith laughed shakily. I don't do this. I don't kiss strangers. I'm not a stranger anymore. No, she agreed. You're not. They stood there for another moment, neither wanting to leave. Finally, Faith forced herself to step back. "I should go. It's late." "Tomorrow night," Ethan said, "I'll be the guy in the back, hanging on your every word. I'll sing something special for you." She drove home with the radio off, wanting to preserve the ringing silence in her head that came from too many feelings arriving at once. Her apartment was small and cluttered with sheet music and books, but it had always felt like enough. Tonight, it felt empty. Faith pulled out her phone and called Sophia. It was morning in Paris, and her friend answered on the second ring. "Someone better be dying or in love," Sophia said by way of greeting. "Those are the only reasons to call at this hour your time." "The second one," Faith said, sinking onto her couch. "Maybe, I don't know. Soph, I did something crazy." She told the whole story, from Ethan buying out the bar to the kiss in the parking lot. Sophia listened with only occasional interjections, mostly variations of "wait, what?" When Faith finished, there was a long pause. Then Sophia said, "Okay, so first, this is either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or you're about to get your heart obliterated. Those are my options, pretty much. This guy is rich, right? And he's making decisions that directly impact your life. That's a massive power imbalance." "I know," Faith said miserably. "That's what makes it so stupid that I kissed him." "Did it feel stupid?" "No, it felt like the first real thing I've done in years." Sophia sighed. "Then I guess you have to see where it goes, but babe, please be careful. These whirlwind things, they're intense at first, but reality catches up eventually." They talked for another 20 minutes before Sophia had to leave for work. Faith tried to sleep, but gave up after an hour of staring at her ceiling. Instead, she sat at her keyboard in the corner of her bedroom and played through songs, looking for something that captured what she was feeling. She settled on "Someone to Watch Over Me," but rearranged it, slowing the tempo and changing some of the chord progressions to make it more intimate. By the time dawn light started filtering through her curtains, she had a version that felt like confession. The next day dragged endlessly. Faith taught her usual Friday afternoon music class at the community center, but she could barely focus. The kids, ranging from 7 to 12, seemed to sense her distraction and got rowdier than usual. "Miss Faith, are you okay?" asked Carmen, a 9-year-old with braces and an exceptional ear for pitch. "You seem weird." "Just tired," Faith assured her. "Let's try that scale again." By the time she made it to the Crimson Note that evening, her nerves were vibrating. She did her usual prep routine, warming up her voice and checking the setlist with Raymond. Charlie appeared backstage looking troubled. "Need to talk to you after your set," he said. "About the building situation." Faith's stomach dropped. "I know about it already. Ethan Yates told me." Charlie's eyebrows rose. "The developer came to see you personally. He bought out the bar last night. It's complicated." Faith couldn't meet his eyes. "Are you really retiring?" "Yeah." Charlie rubbed his weathered face. "I'm 68, Faith. My knees hurt. My wife wants to move closer to our grandkids in Arizona. This was coming eventually. The building sale just made the decision for me." "What about the bar? Could someone else run it? In a renovated building with triple the rent?" "Not likely. This place survives because the overhead is low." He squeezed her shoulder. "You'll land on your feet. Talent like yours, you'll find another venue easy." But Faith didn't want another venue. She wanted this one, with its familiar stage and loyal regulars and Charlie's gruff encouragement. She wanted things to stay the same. Except she also wanted Ethan, which meant wanting things to change. She pushed through the curtain onto the stage and immediately found him in the audience. He'd kept his promise, sitting toward the back near the bar. But his eyes locked onto her immediately, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. The bar was about half full tonight, a decent Friday crowd. Faith went through her usual opening songs, trying to focus on the other audience members. But she felt Ethan's gaze like a physical touch, tracking her every movement. For her fifth song, she signaled a change to Raymond and moved into her new arrangement of Someone to Watch Over Me. She sang it directly to Ethan, not caring who else noticed. The lyrics took on new weight, each line about longing and hope landing differently now that she had a specific person to direct them toward. When the song ended, the applause seemed distant. Faith only registered Ethan standing slowly, his face transformed by something that looked like wonder. She finished her first set and took her break, expecting Ethan to come find her. Instead, he stayed at his table, though his eyes tracked her as she moved through the bar. Faith grabbed water from the bar and was heading back to the dressing room when she heard a woman's voice say Ethan's name. She glanced over and saw a blonde woman in an elegant black dress talking to him, her hand on his arm. Something possessive in the gesture made Faith's chest tighten. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Ethan say something that made the woman laugh and lean closer. Faith forced herself to look away. She had no claim on him. One kiss didn't mean anything, not really. He was a successful, attractive man. Of course he had women in his life. She spent her break in the dressing room, giving herself a stern mental talking to about expectations and reality. By the time she returned to the stage, she'd mostly convinced herself not to care. But when she scanned the audience, Ethan was alone again, the blonde woman nowhere in sight. He caught her looking and mouthed, "You were incredible." Faith sang her second set with renewed energy. When she finished and the crowd dispersed, Ethan waited by the bar. Up close, she could smell the perfume the blonde woman had been wearing, still clinging faintly to his suit jacket. "Friend of yours." Faith tried to keep her voice neutral. "Rachel Sullivan. We worked together on a project 2 years ago. She's an interior designer." Ethan seemed unbothered by the question. "She came over to pitch her services for the renovation. I told her I already had someone contracted. She seemed friendly." "She is friendly." "She's also married to a guy named David who owns a restaurant in Seattle." Ethan smiled. "Are you jealous?" "No," Faith lied. "Good, because I spent your entire second set thinking about kissing you again and not paying attention to anything else." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "That song you sang, the one you changed, was that for me, maybe?" "Faith." Her name on his lips sounded like music. "Come to dinner, not the diner this time. Let me take you somewhere nice. I'm not exactly dressed for nice." She gestured to her performance dress, which was elegant but not fancy restaurant appropriate. "You look perfect. Come on. There's a place I know that makes the best seafood in Portland." They ended up at a small restaurant along the waterfront, intimate and dimly lit with candles on every table. The host greeted Ethan by name and led them to a corner booth with a view of the river. Faith felt underdressed next to the other diners in their expensive clothes, but Ethan seemed oblivious to the difference. They ordered wine and appetizers, falling into conversation as easily as the night before. Ethan told her about a historic theater he'd restored in Spokane, how they'd found original murals under layers of paint and spent months carefully revealing them. Faith described the first time she'd sung in public, a talent show at age 8 where she'd been so nervous she threw up backstage but still went on to win. "What made you push through the fear?" Ethan asked. "I wanted to sing more than I wanted to be comfortable." Faith considered that. "I think that's still true. Performing never stops being scary, putting yourself out there like that. But the alternative is keeping everything inside, and that feels worse. I understand that more than you might think." Ethan leaned back, his hand finding hers on the table. "My father wanted me to take over his contracting business. Build new subdivisions, shopping centers, the kind of projects that make steady money. When I told him I wanted to work on historic preservation instead, he said I was being impractical, that old buildings weren't worth saving. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway, and for a while he was right that it was impractical. I barely made enough to cover expenses for the first 3 years. Lived in a studio apartment, drove a car that broke down constantly, survived on rice and beans. He smiled at the memory. But I was happy. Every building I saved felt like winning a small battle against time and decay. When did it become successful? Faith asked. About 5 years ago. I finished a renovation on a historic hotel in Portland's Pearl District. The project got written up in architectural magazines, won some awards. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hire me. Now I have more work than I can handle. He traced circles on the back of her hand with his thumb. But sometimes I miss those early days when everything was simpler. Nostalgia is a trap, Faith said softly. We remember the past as better than it was because we know how those stories ended, but living it was probably just as messy and uncertain as now. You're right. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her insides melt. I don't want to go backward. I want to figure out how to move forward without losing the things that matter. They stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking about everything and nothing. When they finally left, Ethan insisted on walking Faith to her car even though it meant a 15-minute detour. I want to see you tomorrow, he said as they reached her aging Honda. Not at the bar, just us. I have to work tomorrow night too. Then tomorrow during the day. Coffee, lunch, a walk, whatever you have time for. He cupped her face in his hands. I know this is moving fast. If you need me to slow down, I will. But Faith, I haven't stopped thinking about you for a second since last night. I haven't stopped thinking about you either, she admitted. It's terrifying. Why terrifying? Because I have a pattern of running when things get too intense, and this feels very intense. Ethan studied her face in the streetlight. What if I promise not to let you run? What if I promise to stick around even when it gets hard? You can't promise that. You don't know what I'm like when things fall apart. So show me. He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally her mouth with aching gentleness. Show me all of it. I'm not going anywhere. Faith kissed him back, believing him despite all her self-protective instincts screaming warnings. They stood in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, kissing and talking and kissing some more, until Faith finally forced herself to leave before she did something crazy like invite him home. She drove back to her apartment feeling like she was floating, but as she got ready for bed, reality started creeping back in. Ethan was wealthy and successful. She was a jazz singer working for tips at a bar that was about to close. He restored buildings. She couldn't even afford to fix the water stain on her ceiling. What future could they possibly have? Her phone buzzed with a text message. Ethan, thank you for tonight, for the song, for giving me a chance. Sleep well. Faith smiled despite her doubts and texted back. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow. She fell asleep still smiling. The next morning, Faith woke to her phone ringing. Unknown number. She answered groggily. Miss Larson. This is Patricia Chen from Willamette Records. The woman's voice was crisp and professional. I was at the Crimson Note last night. I'd like to discuss a potential recording opportunity with you. Faith sat up so fast she got dizzy. I'm sorry, what? I run a small independent label here in Portland. We focus on jazz and folk artists. I've been aware of your work for about a year, but hearing you live confirmed what I suspected. You're special. I'd like to offer you a contract. A recording contract. Faith's voice came out squeaky. Pending negotiations, yes. Nothing like the major labels. We're talking a small advance, creative control over your material and a profit-sharing arrangement. But you'd own your masters, choose your songs, maintain artistic integrity. Patricia paused. I understand you had a bad experience in New York. This wouldn't be like that. I promise. They talked for 30 minutes. Patricia wanted Faith to come to her office on Monday to discuss details. No pressure, no obligations, just a conversation. Faith agreed, her mind spinning. After they hung up, Faith sat staring at her phone. A recording contract. A real one, with terms that actually respected her as an artist. It was everything she'd wanted 3 years ago. So why did it feel so complicated? Because of Ethan. Because she was falling for someone whose life was in Seattle while hers was here. Because accepting this contract meant committing to Portland, to building a career here, and she didn't know if that aligned with wherever this relationship was going. She called Sophia again, needing to talk it through. Take the meeting, Sophia said immediately. Even if you don't sign, it's good to know your options. But what if Ethan and I get serious? What if he wants me to move to Seattle or travel with him or something? Babe, you've known him for 2 days. Don't make major career decisions based on a relationship that might not even last the month. Sophia's voice softened. I say this with love. You are overthinking. Go to the meeting. See what this woman offers. If it's good, you can figure out the Ethan situation then. Faith knew she was right. But the scared part of her brain, the part that had run from New York rather than face another disappointment, whispered that this was a mistake, that she should stay small and safe and not reach for things that could hurt her. She spent the morning cleaning her apartment obsessively, trying to quiet her thoughts. At noon, Ethan texted asking if she was free for lunch. Faith suggested a sandwich shop near her place, wanting to stay on familiar ground. She arrived first and claimed a table by the window. When Ethan walked in 10 minutes later wearing jeans and a gray sweater instead of his usual suit, her heart did a stupid flip. He looked younger like this, more relaxed. Hey, he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. The casual intimacy of it made her blush. They ordered at the counter and settled in with their sandwiches. Faith told him about the call from Patricia Chen, watching his face carefully for his reaction. That's incredible, Ethan said immediately. A contract with creative control is exactly what you should have. You think I should take it? I think you should hear what she has to say and make the decision that feels right to you. He reached across the table for her hand. This doesn't change anything between us if that's what you're worried about, doesn't it? Your company is based in Seattle. You work all over the Pacific Northwest, and I'd be committing to Portland. So I'll spend more time in Portland. Ethan said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Faith, I have project managers who handle most of the day-to-day work. I can operate from anywhere. If you being here means I need to be here too, that's fine. You'd rearrange your whole life for someone you just met. Yes, no hesitation. Because I know when something is important and you're important. Faith felt tears prick her eyes. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're talented and stubborn and brave enough to walk away from things that don't serve you. I know you light up when you sing. I know you care deeply about people and art and doing things that matter. He squeezed her hand. I know I want to keep learning everything else. What if it doesn't work? What if we try this and it falls apart? Then it falls apart and we deal with it. But Faith, what if it doesn't fall apart? What if this is the beginning of something real? His dark eyes held hers. I spent 8 years building a successful business. I have money and respect and work I'm proud of, but I've been lonely in the middle of all of it. And then I heard you sing and something clicked into place. Like my life had been slightly out of focus, and suddenly it wasn't anymore. Faith didn't know what to say to that. So she kissed him instead, leaning across the table in the middle of a crowded sandwich shop, not caring who saw. They spent the afternoon walking along the waterfront, holding hands and talking. Ethan told her about his current project, a historic library in Salem that had been damaged by water and neglect. Faith described her dreams for the album she might make, how she'd mix standards with some original compositions, create something that honored jazz traditions while still feeling contemporary. "I'd want to call it something simple," she said. "Maybe just Faith Sings or something. Not try to be clever. I like that. Honest." Ethan pulled her closer as they walked. "When do you think you'd record?" "I have no idea. I don't even know if I'm signing the contract yet." "You will though, you should." He smiled down at her. "And when your album comes out, I'm buying 100 copies. That's excessive. That's supporting my girlfriend's art." Faith stopped walking. "Girlfriend?" Ethan looked suddenly uncertain. "Too presumptuous. We can use whatever label you're comfortable with, or no label." "I just meant I like girlfriend," Faith interrupted. "It's just fast. We can slow down if you want." But Faith realized she didn't want to slow down. She wanted to fall headfirst into this, consequences be damned. "No," she said. "Let's not slow down, let's be crazy together." Ethan's resulting smile was brilliant enough to compete with the afternoon sun. He picked her up and spun her around right there on the waterfront path, making her laugh and cling to his shoulders. They spent the evening at Faith's apartment. She was nervous having him in her space, worried he'd judge the mismatched furniture and cramped rooms. But Ethan just looked around with interest, stopping to examine her collection of records and the keyboard in her bedroom. "Play something for me," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "What do you want to hear?" "Anything. Whatever feels right." Faith sat at the keyboard and played a Gershwin piece, one she'd loved since childhood. Ethan watched her hands move across the keys, his expression soft and attentive. When she finished, he said, "I could listen to you forever." "That might get boring." "Impossible." They ordered takeout and ate on her couch, watching an old movie neither of them paid attention to. Ethan pulled Faith against his side, his arm around her shoulders, and she relaxed into the warmth of him. It felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. "Tell me something you've never told anyone else," Ethan said during a commercial break. Faith thought about deflecting but decided against it. "Sometimes I'm relieved my career didn't take off in New York." "Is that terrible?" "Everyone talks about following your dreams at any cost, but maybe some dreams aren't worth the cost. Maybe settling for smaller dreams that let you sleep at night is actually wise, not cowardly. That's not settling. That's choosing your values over other people's definitions of success." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Your turn. Ask me something. What's your biggest fear?" "That I'll wake up one day and realize I've built a successful career but missed out on having a real life. That I'll be 60 and alone with nothing but a portfolio of restored buildings to keep me company." He was quiet for a moment. "My dad died last year. Heart attack. He was at a job site, working on a Saturday even though he'd officially retired. And I remember standing at his funeral thinking, is this what I'm heading toward? Working myself to death while life passes by. Is that why you bought out the bar? Some kind of midlife crisis even though you're too young for that, maybe. Or maybe hearing you sing reminded me that there are things more important than the next project, the next deadline." He turned to look at her directly. "I don't want to miss this, whatever this is, even if it's scary." "It's very scary," Faith agreed, but she kissed him anyway. Things heated up quickly. Ethan's hands tangled in her hair while Faith explored the solid muscle of his shoulders and back through his sweater. They broke apart breathing hard. "Should I go?" Ethan asked, though he didn't move. "You want to go?" "No, but I don't want to rush you either." Faith made a decision. "Stay." They moved to her bedroom, shedding clothes between kisses. Faith felt self-conscious about her body, her small breasts and the scar on her hip from a childhood surgery. But Ethan looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "You're sure?" he asked, hovering over her on the bed. "I'm sure." They made love slowly, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. Ethan was attentive and generous, checking in with her, adjusting based on her responses. When they finally finished, tangled together in her sheets, Faith felt more connected to him than she had to anyone in years. "That was," Ethan started, then laughed. "I still don't have words for you, me neither." Faith traced patterns on his chest. "You're spending the night, right?" "If you'll have me." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, Faith's head on Ethan's shoulder. She woke once in the early morning hours, disoriented by the weight of another person in her bed. But then Ethan made a sleepy sound and pulled her closer, and she relaxed back into sleep. Sunday morning, they made breakfast together in Faith's tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing. Ethan scrambled eggs while Faith made coffee, and the domestic simplicity of it felt significant. "I have to go into the office for a few hours," Ethan said reluctantly. "Board meeting for one of my projects, but can I see you tonight? After your performance, I'd like that." He kissed her goodbye at her door, lingering like he didn't want to leave. "I'll be thinking about you. That's getting to be a habit for you, a good one." After he left, Faith cleaned up and tried to practice her music. But she kept getting distracted by sense memories of the night before, Ethan's hands on her skin, his voice saying her name. She forced herself to focus. The meeting with Patricia Chen was tomorrow, and she needed to be prepared. She made lists of questions, researched standard contract terms, called a lawyer friend who gave her some basic advice about what to watch out for. By the time she needed to get ready for work, Faith felt slightly more grounded. This was good. She was building something, maybe two somethings, both a relationship and a career. She could handle this. The Crimson Note was busy that Sunday night, a mix of regulars and tourists. Faith sang her heart out, riding the high of the weekend. During her break, Charlie pulled her aside. "Yates came by this afternoon," he said. "The developer. He offered me $50,000 over asking price for the building lease rights. Said he wanted to make sure I could retire comfortably." Faith's heart swelled. "Are you taking it? Already signed the paperwork." "That man's either crazy or in love." Charlie looked at her knowingly. "I'm guessing it's the second one." "We're just dating," Faith protested weakly. "Honey, men don't throw around that kind of money for just dating. He's serious about you." Faith didn't know what to do with that information. Ethan had mentioned helping Charlie, but she hadn't realized he meant financially. It was generous, but it also felt like too much too soon. Like he was using money to solve problems instead of letting things unfold naturally. She performed her second set feeling unsettled. When she came off stage, Ethan was waiting by the bar. She walked past him without stopping, heading to the dressing room. He followed. "Faith, what's wrong?" She turned to face him in the narrow hallway backstage. "You gave Charlie $50,000. I gave him what was fair. The lease rights were worth more than I was paying him. Or you felt guilty and tried to fix it with money." Faith heard the sharpness in her voice and couldn't soften it. "You're doing the same thing you did buying out the bar. Making grand gestures instead of dealing with the actual complexity of the situation." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, isn't it? You swoop in with your money and your connections, making everything easier, but real life isn't that simple. Problems don't disappear just because you throw cash at them. I'm not trying to make problems disappear. I'm trying to do right by people who are being impacted by my business decisions." His voice rose slightly. "What would you have me do instead? Let Charlie lose money because you think accepting help is somehow less noble than struggling? I think you're used to controlling situations with your wealth, and you're trying to control this too. This being what? My relationship with you. Ethan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Faith, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to build something with you. Those are different things, are they? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you're arranging all the pieces of your life to fit what you want, including me. Faith felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I have a pattern, Ethan. I get scared when things get serious and I run. Maybe I'm looking for reasons to do that now, but maybe there are real reasons, like the fact that you think money solves everything. Money doesn't solve everything, Ethan said quietly, but it can ease burdens. It can create opportunities, and yes, I have it, so I use it. That doesn't make me manipulative. They stared at each other in the dim hallway. Finally, Faith said, I need space to think. For how long, I don't know. I have the meeting tomorrow with the label. Let me get through that. Then we can talk. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. Okay, but Faith, I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. He left, and Faith stood alone backstage feeling like she'd just made a terrible mistake. But she also felt like she'd needed to say it, needed to establish some kind of boundary before she completely lost herself in this man. She drove home replaying the fight in her head. Had she overreacted? Probably. Was she self-sabotaging because happiness scared her? Also probably. But beneath those questions was a real concern about the power dynamics in their relationship. Ethan had resources she didn't. He could reshape entire situations with a phone call and a checkbook. What did she bring to balance that? Monday morning arrived too quickly. Faith dressed carefully for her meeting with Patricia Chen, choosing a simple dress and minimal jewelry. She wanted to look professional but authentic. Willamette Records operated out of a converted warehouse in an industrial neighborhood. Patricia's office was filled with vintage recording equipment and posters from past releases. The woman herself was in her 50s, with gray streaked black hair and an easy smile. They talked for 2 hours. Patricia outlined a contract that seemed almost too good to be true. A modest advance, complete creative control, ownership of masters, and a 60-40 profit split in Faith's favor after costs were recouped. The label would handle production, distribution, and marketing, but Faith would direct all creative decisions. Why me? Faith finally asked. You could sign people with bigger followings, more commercial appeal. Because I'm not interested in commercial appeal. I'm interested in art that matters. Patricia leaned back in her chair. I started this label 15 years ago because I was tired of watching talented artists get chewed up by an industry that values profit over creativity. We're small, but everyone we sign gets to make the music they actually want to make. And you, Faith, have something special, a voice and a sensibility that deserves to be heard. Faith felt tears prick her eyes for the second time in 2 days. Can I think about it? Take a week. Read over the contract, have a lawyer review it. If you have questions or want to negotiate any terms, I'm open to discussion. Patricia smiled. But I hope you'll say yes. I think we could make something beautiful together. Faith left the meeting feeling dazed. This was real. A legitimate path to having a music career on her own terms. She should have been elated. Instead, she felt scared and confused and desperately wanted to talk to Ethan. She called him from her car. He answered on the first ring. Faith, the contract is good, really good, like almost too good to be true good. That's wonderful. She could hear the smile in his voice. Are you going to sign? I think so, but I need to apologize first. Faith took a breath. I overreacted last night. You were being generous with Charlie, and I turned it into something ugly because I got scared. Scared of what? Of how much I care about you, of how quickly this is happening, of the fact that you have all this power and success and I'm just a singer in a jazz bar. The words came out in a rush. "I'm afraid I'm not enough for you. That eventually you'll realize I'm too much work, too complicated, too damaged from my past. And I pushed you away before you could figure that out and leave me." There was a long pause. Then Ethan said, "Where are you right now?" "In my car, outside the record label." "Stay there." "I'm coming to you." He hung up before she could respond. Faith sat in her car feeling exposed and vulnerable. 20 minutes later, Ethan's truck pulled up next to her. He got out and opened her car door, crouching down to her eye level. "You are enough," he said firmly. "More than enough. You're talented and beautiful and braver than you give yourself credit for. And yes, this is happening fast. Yes, it's scary. But Faith, I'm scared too. I'm terrified of messing this up, of doing the wrong thing, of losing you before we've even really begun." "You are. Of course I am. This matters. You matter." He took her hands. "I'm sorry if my helping Charlie felt controlling. That wasn't my intention. I'm used to solving problems, and sometimes I forget that not every problem needs solving. That sometimes people just need support, not solutions. And I'm sorry for attacking you instead of just telling you I was feeling insecure." Faith squeezed his hands. "I don't know how to do this. Be in a relationship with someone who actually seems to want all of me, mess and complications included. Then we'll figure it out together." Ethan stood and pulled her out of the car, wrapping her in his arms right there in the parking lot. "No more running, okay? When things get hard, we talk about it instead of pushing each other away." "Okay," Faith said into his chest. "I can try that." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other. Finally, Ethan pulled back to look at her. "So, are you signing the contract?" "I think I am. The lawyer friend said it looks clean. Patricia seems legitimate, and the terms are better than anything I could have hoped for." Faith felt a smile spreading across her face. "I'm going to make an album." "You're going to make an incredible album." Ethan kissed her, thorough and celebratory. "We need to celebrate. Dinner somewhere fancy, champagne, the works. I have to work tonight. Then tomorrow, say yes." "Yes." They went to lunch at a Vietnamese restaurant near Patricia's office, talking through everything Faith had learned in the meeting. Ethan asked smart questions about distribution and marketing, clearly understanding the business side in ways Faith didn't. Instead of making her feel inadequate, his knowledge felt supportive. "I could put you in touch with some people I know in the music industry," he offered. "Not to interfere, just to give you additional resources if you want them." "That would actually be really helpful," Faith admitted. "I don't know anything about this stuff. You'll learn, and you have Patricia's team to guide you." He reached across the table for her hand. "I'm so proud of you." The simple statement made Faith's chest tight. When had anyone last said they were proud of her? Her parents had been supportive when she moved to New York, but disappointed when she came home. Her New York manager had been encouraging until she wasn't. But Ethan's pride felt uncomplicated, like he was happy for her success without needing anything from it. That evening at the Crimson Note, Faith sang with renewed energy. Between sets, she told Raymond and Marcus about the record deal. They were both thrilled, though Raymond looked a bit sad. "This might be my last gig as your accompanist," he said. "Once you're recording, you'll work with studio musicians." "Are you kidding? You're coming with me." Faith hadn't even considered recording without him. "I'll clear it with Patricia, but Raymond, you're part of my sound. I'm not doing this without you." His smile was brilliant. "In that case, congratulations. We're making an album." The rest of the week passed in a blur. Faith signed the contract with Willamette Records on Wednesday after her lawyer gave final approval. She and Ethan fell into a routine of seeing each other almost every day, fitting around her performance schedule and his work demands. He came to the bar several nights, sitting in back and watching her sing. Other nights, they cooked dinner at one of their apartments, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Faith met his sister Alina over video chat, a warm woman who taught history and teased Ethan mercilessly about being smitten. Ethan met Sophia when she called during one of their dinners, and they bonded over their shared protective instincts toward Faith. "I like him," Sophia declared after they hung up. "He seems solid, but if he hurts you, I'm flying to Portland to kick his ass." "Noted," Ethan said with a grin. 2 weeks after they met, Ethan invited Faith to visit one of his job sites. The building was a former courthouse in Salem, its neoclassical facade covered in scaffolding. Inside, crews were carefully restoring original woodwork and updating the infrastructure. "This is incredible," Faith said, running her hand along a mahogany banister they just refinished. "You really do save these places." "We try." Ethan pointed out various features they'd uncovered during demolition, his passion for the work evident. "Every building has stories. People who worked here, got married here, made important decisions here. When we restore them, we're preserving those stories for future generations." "It's not so different from music," Faith observed. "Jazz standards are old buildings in a way. Songs that have been around for decades, full of history. When I sing them, I'm preserving something while also making it new. I never thought of it that way, but you're right." Ethan slipped his arm around her waist. "We're both in the business of honoring the past while building toward the future." They ate lunch in a park near the courthouse, picking up sandwiches from a nearby deli. The afternoon was warm for early spring, and Faith felt utterly content sitting on a bench with Ethan, eating and talking and watching people pass by. "I've been thinking about something," Ethan said. "The building where the Crimson Note is located. The renovations are scheduled to start in 3 weeks. I know." Faith had been trying not to think about it. Charlie had already announced the bar's closing date, and she'd been fielding questions from regulars about where she'd perform next. What if the new tenant was another jazz bar? Not the Crimson Note exactly, but something similar. Ethan spoke carefully, watching her reaction. "I'd need to find someone to operate it, obviously, but the space is perfect for that kind of venue. It would be a shame to turn it into something else." "Are you asking if I want to run a jazz bar?" "I'm asking if you'd be interested in partnering with someone to run one. You'd handle the artistic direction, programming, that sort of thing. Someone else would manage the business side. You'd still perform, but you'd also have a stake in the venue itself." He rushed on before she could respond. "It's just an idea. You're going to be busy with the album, and I know you might see this as another grand gesture. But Faith, the truth is the space deserves to stay a music venue, and you deserve to have a home base for your career." Faith's mind raced. Owning part of a jazz bar had never occurred to her as a possibility. She'd always been the performer, never the owner, but the idea appealed to her more than she wanted to admit. "Who would handle the business side?" she asked. "I have a few people in mind. Or if you know someone you trust, we could explore that." Ethan hesitated. "This isn't me trying to control your life, I promise. It's a genuine business opportunity that I think could benefit both of us. You'd get a venue. I'd get a reliable tenant who cares about the space." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. No pressure." But Faith was already thinking about it, imagining what she could do with that space if given creative freedom. Better sound system, more comfortable seating, maybe expanding the stage slightly. Programming that mixed established artists with newcomers, creating a real hub for jazz in Portland. "I want to say yes," she said slowly, "but I need to understand the financial side better. What it would cost, what my responsibilities would be. I'll have my team put together a proposal. You can review it with your lawyer, make sure everything's fair." Ethan pulled her close. "I want you to feel good about this, whatever you decide." That night, Faith couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Ethan, his breathing slow and even, and thought about how much her life had changed in 3 weeks. A month ago, she'd been stuck in a comfortable rut, singing the same songs to the same audiences, not expecting anything to change. Now she had a record deal and might become a business owner, and was falling in love with a man who made her believe in possibilities. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The Crimson Note's final night arrived faster than Faith wanted. The bar was packed, every seat filled with regulars who'd come to say goodbye. Faith had prepared a special set list, mixing crowd favorites with personal requests. Charlie gave a short speech before her final set, thanking everyone for 3 decades of patronage. His voice cracked when he thanked Faith specifically, saying she'd been the best thing to happen to the bar in its final years. Faith took the stage with tears in her eyes. She dressed in her best gown, deep blue and elegant, wanting to honor the occasion. Ethan sat in his usual table near the back, but tonight Sophia was with him, having flown in as a surprise. Faith's parents were there too, up from Eugene, looking proud and a little sad. She sang for 2 hours straight, no breaks, pouring everything into each song. The audience was silent between numbers, the reverence in the room palpable. For her final song, Faith chose What a Wonderful World, Louis Armstrong's Ode to Beauty and Hope. As she sang the last notes, her voice cracking slightly on the high note, she looked around the room at all these people who'd supported her for 3 years. The applause was thunderous, people standing and cheering. Faith took several bows, crying openly now. When it finally died down, she said into the microphone, "Thank you for letting me sing for you. This place, these nights, all of you, you saved my life in ways you'll never know. I hope I gave back even a fraction of what you gave me." More applause. Faith left the stage and was immediately engulfed in hugs from regulars, people pressing flowers and notes into her hands. Her parents hugged her tightly, her mother whispering that she was so proud. Sophia grabbed her in a fierce embrace, saying something in French that Faith didn't understand but felt in her bones. Finally, she made it to Ethan. He didn't say anything, just pulled her close and held her while she cried into his shoulder. The bar slowly emptied. By midnight, only a handful of people remained: Faith, Ethan, Sophia, Raymond, Marcus, and Charlie. They sat around the bar drinking whiskey and sharing memories. Charlie told stories about the early days, back when the neighborhood was rougher and the bar catered to dock workers instead of hipsters. Raymond shared tales of legendary musicians who'd played the space over the years. "What's next for you?" Marcus asked Faith. "Recording an album, maybe opening a new venue." She glanced at Ethan, who smiled. "Building something." "That sounds good," Charlie said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings." They all drank to that. Faith, Ethan, and Sophia were the last to leave, turning off lights and locking doors. Outside, the street was quiet, the bar's neon sign dark for the first time in Faith's memory. "You okay?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Yeah." Faith surprised herself by meaning it. "Sad but okay. Ready for what comes next." They walked Sophia back to her hotel, promising to meet for brunch the next morning. Then Faith and Ethan returned to his apartment, a spacious loft in an old industrial building he'd renovated himself. "I'm glad it's done," Faith admitted as they got ready for bed. "The waiting was harder than the actual ending." "That's usually how it works." Ethan pulled her into bed, tucking her against his side. "Tomorrow we start planning the future." "Tomorrow," Faith agreed. "But for tonight, can we just be here? Always?" The next 3 months passed in a whirlwind. Faith spent her days in the studio with Patricia's team, recording songs she'd loved for years alongside 3 originals she'd written. Raymond played piano on every track, his intuitive understanding of her voice making the process smooth. They recorded at a studio in Northeast Portland, a converted church with incredible natural acoustics. Faith had worried that recording would feel clinical compared to live performance, but instead she discovered new dimensions to her voice. Without an audience to perform for, she could be more vulnerable, more experimental. Songs took on different characters in the studio, becoming intimate conversations instead of declarations. Between recording sessions, she worked with Ethan's team to design the new jazz bar. They'd settled on calling it Blue Note Revived, a nod to the legendary label while establishing its own identity. Faith hired a manager she'd met through Patricia, a woman named Grace who'd run successful music venues in Chicago. Together, they planned everything from the drink menu to the booking calendar. Ethan had been careful to give Faith space to make her own decisions, offering advice when asked, but never pushing. The financial arrangement was fair, with Faith putting in sweat equity instead of capital and earning a percentage of profits. It felt balanced in ways that eased her earlier concerns about power dynamics. Her relationship with Ethan deepened as they spent more time together. They had their first real fight over his tendency to work too much, with Faith accusing him of using his job to avoid emotional intimacy. They'd worked through it, Ethan acknowledging that she was right and making concrete changes to be more present. They had quiet moments too. Lazy Sunday mornings in bed, cooking dinner together, walking through Powell's books arguing about favorite novels. Faith met Ethan's extended family at a barbecue in Seattle, charming his mother and bonding with his nieces over karaoke. In August, Faith's album released. Faith Sings featured 12 tracks, a mix of jazz standards and her original compositions. Patricia threw a release party at a small venue in Portland, inviting music journalists and industry people alongside Faith's friends and family. Ethan stood near the back during Faith's performance that night, same as he always did. But when she introduced her final song, an original called Someone to Watch Over Me that she'd rewritten from the Gershwin standard, she dedicated it to him. "This is for the man who bought out a jazz bar just to hear me sing," she said into the microphone. "Thank you for seeing me." The song was a love letter set to music, vulnerable and honest. When she finished, Ethan had tears in his eyes. The album received strong reviews in jazz publications and local papers. Sales were modest but steady, and Faith started getting booking requests from venues around the Pacific Northwest. Patricia suggested a small tour for the fall, maybe 10 cities, nothing huge but enough to build momentum. Blue Note Revived opened in September, 6 months after the Crimson Note closed. The renovated space was beautiful, all the historic details restored while updated with modern sound and lighting systems. Opening night drew a capacity crowd, people curious about the new venue and eager to support Faith. She sang her first notes on that stage feeling like she'd come home. The acoustics were perfect, the audience responsive, everything clicking into place. During her break, Faith stood at the bar next to Ethan and looked around at the full house. "We did it," she said, still amazed. "You did it," Ethan corrected. "I just provided the space, you made it matter." Grace reported strong advance ticket sales for upcoming shows. They'd booked a mix of local talent and touring artists, creating exactly the kind of programming Faith had envisioned. The bar was on track to be profitable within 6 months, maybe sooner. That night, after closing, Faith and Ethan sat alone in the empty venue. "Remember when you asked me why I bought out the bar?" Ethan said. "I didn't have a good answer then. And now I'd say I was looking for something without knowing what it was, and then I found you and suddenly everything made sense." He took her hand. "I love you, Faith. I've loved you since that first night when you came off stage and asked me why. I love your voice and your courage and the way you make me want to be better." Faith's heart expanded. They'd been dancing around the words for weeks, both feeling them but neither brave enough to speak first. "I love you too," she said. "Even though you're stubborn and you work too much and you solve problems with money more often than I'd like. I love you because you see me completely and you're not scared of what you see." They kissed in the empty bar, the same way they'd kissed that first night in the parking lot. But this time it felt like a beginning instead of a risk. 6 months later, on a rainy February afternoon, Ethan proposed. They were at the coast, walking along a beach near Cannon Rock. He stopped in the middle of the sand and got down on one knee, producing a simple ring with a small sapphire. "I know it's only been a year," he said, rain running down his face, "but I also know I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Faith pulled him to his feet and kissed him. Yes. Obviously, yes. They got married that summer in a small ceremony at Blue Note Revived. Sophia flew in from Paris to be Faith's maid of honor. Elena stood up for Ethan. They wrote their own vows, promising to support each other's dreams and argue honestly and keep choosing each other every day. Charlie attended, retired but happy, telling everyone he'd known from the beginning they were meant for each other. Patricia came with several artists from her label, turning the reception into an impromptu jam session. Raymond played piano while various musicians took turns singing and playing, transforming the evening into the kind of joyful chaos that perfect weddings require. Faith's parents danced together, looking younger than they had in years. Ethan's mother cornered Faith at one point, hugging her tightly and saying, "You brought my son back to life. Thank you." Late in the evening, Faith and Ethan snuck away to sit on the bar's back patio, taking a moment alone. "Happy?" Ethan asked. "Impossibly." Faith leaned against him, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "A year ago I was singing in a bar and going nowhere. Now I'm married to my favorite person, running a venue I love, making music that matters. How did this become my life? You took a chance. You asked why instead of just accepting the situation. You were brave." Ethan kissed her temple. "That's how." They sat there together, hearing the music and laughter from inside, knowing they'd return to the celebration in a moment but needing this quiet space first. A year of whirlwind changes had led to this, to building something real and lasting. "What happens next?" Faith asked. "Whatever we want," Ethan said. "That's the beauty of it." And sitting there with her husband's arms around her, her venue thriving and her music reaching people, Faith believed him. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility, exactly the way it should be. They'd talked about children someday, maybe in a year or two. About buying a house with enough room for Faith's piano and Ethan's drafting table. About growing old together while still creating and building and pushing each other toward better versions of themselves. But for now, this was enough. More than enough. This was everything. Inside, someone called for the bride and groom. Faith and Ethan stood, hand in hand, ready to rejoin their celebration. As they walked back toward the music and the light, Faith thought about that first night when a stranger had bought out her bar. She'd come off stage to ask him why, expecting some complicated answer about ego or loneliness or crisis. Instead, she'd found love, found partnership, found someone who'd seen her truly and decided she was worth fighting for. The music swelled as they entered, friends and family cheering. Ethan spun Faith onto the makeshift dance floor, and she laughed as they moved together, perfectly in sync. This was her life now. This abundance of love and music and possibility. She couldn't imagine wanting anything more.